This is 1988 Topps, where every card has a story to tell. Your hosts are David McKellis and Matt Kuzma. Let's play ball. Hey, welcome back to another episode of 1988 Topps. David, what's our card for this week?
Our card for this week is card number 426. That is Randy Reddy from the San Diego Padres.
Okay. Why?
Why not? Why not, Matt? Matt, we're going to go through...
Why not? Why not, Randy? Okay.
We're going to go through 792 cards in this.
I get that. All right, so let me look at the card real quick, and let me pull it up here on the Scantron 2020. All right, so I'm pulling up the front and the back of the card. I have to admit, I've never heard of this player before. Let's see. I'm looking at the front of the card. This gentleman, they did something like I can't really tell what his body looks like because of the position, or what his face looks like either. Something's going on there. He's in a stance that I might call generic baseball swing number 2, which is, hey, pretend like you just finished a swing. It's really strange. And then looking at the back of the card, okay, so he's an outfielder and third baseman. Again, never heard of him. 87 season. Okay, so I can see where he had a really good season in 87. 124 games. Let's see, more than 100 hits, 12 homers, 309 average, and a 520 slugging percentage. So that's, you know, good. That's a very good season, especially compared to his other seasons at the Brewers, where he wasn't batting anywhere near that. And then had, looks like, one game for the Padres in 86 that made the stat sheet. So 23 games for the Brewers in 86 and only one for the Padres. So he got traded, it looks like. And then there's a fun fact at the bottom, which I guess points this out, that he was traded to the Padres June 1986. And he was so valuable that the Brewers didn't receive a player for him until after the season was over. They received infielder Tim Pisnarski, October 29th, 1986. So he was traded away for what looks like nobody for the rest of the season. So this does not add up to like a power player to me. So this early in our series, David, I'm a little at a loss. Listener Adam M, he had never heard of him either, and so he just had questions about his name and the words in his name. So is he always ready? Is he always Randy? Which makes me think that this is actually the card that best describes 1980s TV character Blanche Devereaux from the Golden Girls, that she's Randy and ready. So, David, that's my view of like why not Randy Reddy this early in the season. I really at a loss. So, help me here.
Yeah, this is so good points. Appreciate any references to Blanche Devereaux. Randy Reddy is, and probably in 1988, this was a spokes card. You would put this in the spokes of your bicycle and listen to it flip and make fun noises on your bicycle. But Randy Reddy had a real outlier season in 1987, and there's a few reasons why I want to talk about Randy. 1987, Randy Reddy had an outlier season. He was the 9th best positional player in wins above replacement in the National League. And this is a guy who, Matt, as you pointed out, had never really played a full season. In fact, in 1986, had only played one game with the Padres, and then came back in 87 and had a pretty big year. So much so that he was the Padres' comeback player of the year. I want to talk about Randy first because he's an outlier. Second, because of that comeback and a little bit of the adversity that Randy overcame, and a difficult situation that Randy had in 1986. And finally, you brought up Tim Pisnarski. And Tim Pisnarski was the subject of another listener question that, and I think this allows us to go back to cover a listener question. So those are the three reasons I wanted to talk about Randy
Okay.
Reddy.
Sounds good. I'm in. I can't wait.
Yeah, not probably a lot of people really want to talk about the 1987 Padres. The 1987 Padres were the second worst team in the major leagues. They were the worst team in the National League. This team had Tony Gwynn. They also had Goose Gossage, two Hall of Famers. But Randy Reddy was the second highest rated player on that team in wins above replacement, second only to Tony Gwynn, who led the league in hitting as he tended to do in most seasons in the 1980s. As you pointed out, Randy hit 309, 12 home runs, which was a career high. His average was a career high. And he was generally a utility infielder playing second base and third base. So that also kind of makes him valuable in that he was able to hit for a little bit of power, a lot of doubles, good average, at a time when second basemen weren't hitting for that much power and weren't doing a lot offensively. So that's a little bit of a preview of Randy's 1987 season. But leading up to that point, Randy had a difficult upbringing. So the card shows him born in San Mateo in 1960. As a teenager, he went with his dad to go work in Alaska on oil pipelines.
Wow.
And so I say as a teenager, he was up in Alaska working with his dad on oil pipelines. His father also passed away when he was 16.
Oh, man.
So I'm not entirely sure if he was up there at 14 years old working on an oil pipeline.
Oh, my God.
And a lot of his salary was going home to his mom, who was still in the San Francisco Bay Area. His father passes away when Randy is 16, and Randy goes back home, is working a midnight shift making donuts from midnight to 6 in the morning, and then going to high school.
Oh,
Has
my
a successful
God.
high school. Yeah.
Randy Reddy's a saint. I didn't know that he was a saint. Okay, now I get it. I mean, holy.
Yeah, his life doesn't really get much easier later in his career, and as we'll see in 86, he had another difficult situation. But his early life is pretty difficult. He's working midnight shifts at a donut factory, going to school during the day, goes on to play college ball at Cal State East Bay, and then transfers to Colorado Mesa University. And an interesting story that I read, and something that maybe, I don't even know if this is allowed anymore, the story that he told was that a scout told him that if he transferred to this other university, he'd be able to play infield. And so that would give him an opportunity to play shortstop. That seems like maybe... I don't know if that's allowed now for scouts to tell a guy where they should transfer colleges, but in Randy's case, it worked out, and he was drafted in 1980. He had a pretty good minor league career, hitting over 300 at all levels of the minor league system: A ball, double A, triple A, and gets called up to the majors in 1983, was kind of a utility infielder playing second base, playing most positions except catcher and shortstop. But he never really found a starting position with the Brewers. So in 1986, he's traded from the Brewers to the Padres for a player to be named later. That player to be named later is the subject of a listener question. Jeff S. from Springfield. What's the deal with Tim Pisnarski? Matt, I don't know.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. So
That's a great listener question from the mailbag.
Yeah, so that question, so a little bit of background here. Tim Pisnarski was in the 87 set, was a future star. And his card was a future stars card in 1987. So they were expecting big things from Tim. Other future stars in that set were Bo Jackson,
Okay.
Rafael Palmeiro,
Future,
and some of these
definitely
guys
future
just,
star.
yeah, some of these guys turn out and some of them just don't ever pan out. And unfortunately, Tim Pisnarski was one of those, and Jeff remembered that Tim was one of those guys that just never really panned out. So a little bit of an update, in Tim Pisnarski news, which I like to think that this podcast is your number one source for Tim Pisnarski news.
Definitely.
Part of Jeff's question was, why was this guy listed as a future star in the first place if he was a guy who by 1987 wasn't even in the league? And a little bit of background, as you and I are both Chicagoans. Tim Pisnarski, also a Chicago guy. He played at Marist High School, won an Illinois State Championship, went on to Eastern Illinois University.
Shout out. Go Panthers.
Yeah, where he was a two-time All-American. Another 1988 player, Kevin Seitzer, also went to Eastern Illinois University. He's a Kansas City Royal, and I always liked Kevin Seitzer as well. So we'll talk about Jacksonville's own Kevin Seitzer at some point too. Tim was drafted in the first round in 1981 and had a fantastic AAA season in 1986. He was the minor league player of the year, Pacific Coast League MVP in 1986, and he got called up to the Padres. So that's why he was a future star. They were really expecting big things from him. In mid 1986, Randy Reddy is sent from the Brewers to the Padres for a player to be named later. A lot of times what they'll do here, Matt, is they will make a list of guys, and at the end of the season, the team who has that player to be named later can pick from a list of guys. And a lot of times it's minor league players and players who are kind of utility guys. In this case, it was one of the Padres' future stars. Tim Pisnarski was on that list, and the Brewers picked him.
Okay.
Tim never really made it back to the majors, and from what I found is currently working in metal finishing in the Chicagoland area, and who knows, maybe we can get him on the show to talk about.
I think that'd be great. Get them some airtime.
I know that Eastern is well known for their quarterbacks and NFL coaching tree. Tony Romo.
Yeah, if we could get
Jimmy
Tony Romo
Garoppolo
on the show too, I think that'd be fantastic. He probably loves 1988 tops.
They also had a couple good baseball players, including Tim. So shout out to Tim Pisnarski and Jeff for that. So that trade in 1986 coincided with the next in a series of kind of unfortunate events for Randy. Well, and this one would be a defining moment in his life. In 1986, he plays one game for the Padres. After playing that first game, he gets a call that his wife had collapsed and she had had a heart attack that was the result of diet pills, and she became a quadriplegic and was largely unable to communicate. So Randy has a wife who has been incapacitated and 3 young children. He's recently been traded from the Brewers to the Padres. He ends up sitting out the remainder of the 1986 season, trying to figure out health care for his wife, child care. In the middle of traveling around the country with a professional baseball team would be incredibly difficult. It ends up 4 years later, Randy wins a lawsuit against the doctor. Randy and his wife win a lawsuit against the doctor who had prescribed the diet pills, and they won $24 million to pay for medical bills and his wife's future care, as well as child care. So in 1987, this is what Randy is dealing with as he is coming back to play Major League Baseball after taking the 1986 season off. And Randy viewed baseball as an outlet from the difficult situation that he was dealing with, taking care of 3 young children and a wife who needed around-the-clock medical attention. When asked about it, Hall of Famer Tony Gwynn said, "I don't know what's going on in that little man's head, but something is definitely clicking that keeps him going. That man is tough. And Randy, over his career and from his childhood and into this 1987 season, showed his resiliency and mental toughness. 1987, he plays half of his games at third base and half of them at second base. He didn't, Matt, as you read earlier, he played in 124 games, but he only started in 89 of them. He started the season as a pinch hitter mostly, getting one at bat per game, not playing regularly. And by the end of the season, he was starting pretty regularly. So because of that, he did not have enough plate appearances to qualify for a batting title. So if you look at the statistics of that season, he would have had one of the highest batting averages if he had enough plate appearances to qualify. But his 309 batting average was pretty solid and a career year. 1987 accounted for half of Randy's career wins above replacement. Career wins above replacement were somewhere around 11, and in this season he had 5.5 of them. So really, this season was one of the most productive of his career and a huge outlier from the rest of a relatively nondescript career.
So, David, I guess my question is, if here's a guy where he starts by pinch hitting, he doesn't have a whole lot of starts in the first half of the season, how does he end up, in the top 10 of wins above replacement in this season, with all these Hall of Famers and all-star type of players? Like what happened that year?
Yeah, Matt, that's a great question. He ended up, and as I sent you that top 10, he was tied with Barry Bonds that season in wins above replacement. The other guys in that top 10 list are Tony Gwynn, Eric Davis, two-time MVP Dale Murphy. And then you have Randy Reddy. And he hit 309 in the first half of the season, and he ended up hitting 309 for the 1987 season. So for both the first and second half of that season. But the second half of the season, he also hit 11 home runs. He hit 8 of them in the last month of the season. In that last month, he hit 337. His on-base plus slugging was 1.155. He had the most home runs in the National League, tied with Darryl Strawberry and a few others in that last month. And in September, had the second highest WAR in the majors behind Alan Trammell. So he had a really great September, and he was actually the Padres Player of the Month in September of 1987. And then he was the Padres Comeback Player of the Year in 1987, which was probably meant a big deal to him in that year to be recognized by his teammates as that Comeback Player of the Year.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's quite a turnaround. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Actually, a really incredible story, given everything that had happened to him and to his wife in that year past. Do we know anything else about the Japanese team that he ended up playing for?
He did not play for very long in Japan.
I ask because, when we finish this series, I'd always thought that, a Japanese baseball card show, would be a good side project. So
yes, so
curious.
He played for Chibalata.
Okay.
I think that's the correct pronunciation, but he did not.
I'm going to trust you on that one.
Yeah, he did not do much for them, and he also then came back to play in the United States afterwards and thought maybe he could get his career restarted in the minors, but he never made it back to the majors after 1996. So he was traded from another guy on that Padres team was John Kruk, and Randy was traded along with John Kruk to the Phillies, and he continued to be kind of a utility guy, replacement infielder for the Phillies, but he did complete a nearly unassisted triple play with the Phillies. And we we're going to have to include a video of this in the show notes.
Yeah, I could. Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes for sure.
But he was, and the person who hit the ball, Randy is playing second base. Tony Gwynn hits a line drive to now Philadelphia Philly, Randy Reddy. Randy catches the ball. There's a man on second who had already taken off to third. Randy tags second. The man coming from first was almost to second base, and Randy could have tagged him for an unassisted triple play, which would have been historic. Mm-hmm. He instead threw the ball to first base, completes the triple play, but doesn't get it unassisted. He was asked about it and said that he really liked that glove, and he didn't want to have to send it to the Hall of Fame. So he clearly had a...
What?
Yeah, there's some pretty good interviews with Randy Reddy, and he, in spite of all of the adversity and I think he's had to deal with a lot of interviews about the situation with his wife.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other interviews and a lot of other anecdotes about him being generally a pretty funny guy, and he was, he later became a coach, and most recently that I found was he was coaching with the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp. So I did not know that there was a Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp team, but I think that he is no longer with that team. But I'm not entirely sure where he is as of 2020.
We'll do a status check on the Jumbo Shrimp season for next week. But that's a great story and a really good line and a really great card. As we say, every card has a story to tell here, and that is absolutely true with Randy Reddy.
Yeah, man, I think that this is one of those where, as a 8-year-old kid, you look at this card and you see a guy who had a decent season, maybe wasn't even anything beyond 1987, but you don't really get the insight into what was happening in those early seasons. And I think that's what we like to do here, is tell the rest of the story behind these cards.
That is right. Well, thank you, David. That was excellent. I know a lot more about Randy Reddy than I did before, and all the better for it. For listeners who want to get on the mailbag, you can email us to 1988topspodcast@gmail.com. Thank you very much. Please keep the mailbag rolling, and we will see you next week.